Hello, everybody. Is everybody in? Okay, so the next speaker is from Finland, a blogger on Google Analytics. And now we have the flashing lights as well, so which is very cool. So I'm so happy to see so many of you here. Maybe some people are still having a coffee, which is fine. I completely understand it. So first of all, I'm very, very honored and humbled to be invited finally to Madrid. Thank you, David, for the amazing conference and all the support staff as well. It's been pretty nice so far. Let's see if it continues to be nice during this talk. I'm also proud to present yet another bald guy presenting on stage. I see that we have a pattern here. Male pattern baldness is the official name of it. I want to talk about I love talking about customization. I love talking about the platforms that we use, like Google Analytics and Google Tag Manager, and kind of dig deep into them and look at not just the flaws in them, because it's always so fun to look for flaws and then not give any kind of instructions on how to fix them, but also look at how we use these tools to learn more about our businesses and learn more about customization in general. So this topic is measuring content, which surprisingly is very, very dear to me, because I don't have an e-commerce store to my name or anything like that. So the only thing I can measure with interest is content. I'm sure I do work for clients as well, but that's not that interesting. Very, very briefly about myself, I work at a company called Reaktor, and I find it important to mention that here because we are an IT company. We're developers. We're the people you guys probably hate. And why you started using Google Tag Manager in the first place, right? Because IT is so slow and so horrible and yucky, and now you finally have a tool with which you can go behind our backs and do your dirty little stuff there. Well, look, we are also, there are very nice people among us, and I just kind of want to remember that, show us some love every now and then. And I'm also in the Google Developer Expert program, which is it's very difficult to explain what it is. I don't really know myself. It's at some point, Google contacts you like through these dark paths and contacts you and lets you know that you might be interested in this program. And what I usually do is I talk to developers about what a good tool Google Analytics is. So a marketing audience or a marketer audience is actually quite unfamiliar to me in the way that it's out of my comfort zone. But let's see what happens here. I know that there's a lot of technical people in the audience, so I don't have to doubt that you guys know what I'm talking about, which is always a good thing to start with. So let's start this talk by just figuring out why talk about customization in the first place? Why do we need to talk about it? I mean, GA is great. You just plug it in and you see all the data come in. You see all your KPIs, you see bounce rates and conversion rates, you see pages per session, you see session duration, visits, all this stuff that, for example, in Brian Clifton's survey, you placed the most trust in those numbers, right? You did that. Don't try to say you didn't. Visits and page views, you're on the top of your trust scale. Are you sure about that? Do you know what they are? Do you know how they are collected? Why do you trust them the most? I mean, why do you trust Google Analytics default metrics the most? And the things that you trusted the least were the ones which you should be customizing the most. So you don't trust your own work, but you trust the default metrics of the platform. I'm not questioning your judgment. I've always just thought that that whole thing should be inverted. We should trust most of the stuff that we have the power to customize. We have very little power to influence page views and visits and how they are calculated. So any trust that we have towards them is dogmatic. We're forced to accept that because the platform works that way. Well, I have good news. We can actually impact those. We can actually change the default metrics of Google Analytics, for example. And I hope like the one thing that should be maybe the end result of this talk would be that you'll be comfortable with approaching those metrics with a new critical point of view. So let's see what happens. This is at Google Analytics dashboard. It's what you see when you go to the dashboards part. There's all sorts of cool stuff here. There's page views, you know, what were the most viewed articles on the site. There's bounce and conversion rates, you know, who are the people who came, puked, and left, according to Avinash, who converted, who you know, subscribed to a newsletter. And then there's the funnel in the right, there's users, there's sessions, page views, transactions. And this is the kind of stuff that I'd be comfortable in saying like 90% of our time or the users of Google Analytics do. This is the kind of stuff they configure, these basic metrics, and they shape them in ways to help understand the business. But there's something wrong with this picture. All of these metrics are given to us by Google Analytics. We're working with those metrics. We're working with their concept of a session. We're working with their ideal of a page view. Now, without going too much into kind of the linguistic stuff here, have you ever thought about the word page views? I don't know what it's in Spanish, but at least in English, it's like a viewing of a page, viewing with your eyes of a page. Do you really think all those thousands of views are people viewing a page? Because a page view is also sent when you open a page into a browser tab and you never look at it. That's a page view, right? It's sent when you open 1,000 pages in browser tabs in new windows. It's sent with these so-called virtual page views. There's nothing about that metric that tells you are people actually viewing content or not. It's just a request sent to Google Analytics. Now, this might sound nitpicking, and it is. I'm being very pedantic here, but I want to do that for argumentation's sake, because these metrics that we are used to using, we know what they are because we are analytics professionals, but the people we are reporting them to might not know. And now we're going back to what Brian had, that we don't need to educate the C-level on analytics. That's true, we don't. We don't have to do anything for the C-level in terms, they don't have to know how the measurement protocol works. It would be nice if they asked for that, but they don't. But what they do need to know is that the metrics we are reporting them with are meaningful to the organization that you're working with. And meaningful data is like the whole thing that this entire paradigm is moving around. Are these numbers meaningful to us? So I have sessions in red there because I want to drill down. And I do this exercise every time I give a talk, because I want to unravel what a Google Analytics session is. Now, session in Google Analytics is the most important aggregation level. Everything revolves around sessions. You don't do year-over-year reporting with page views. It's not beneficial, it's not useful. But what you do is you talk about conversion rates, you talk about bounce rates, you talk about transaction rates. And in Google Analytics, these are all revolving around sessions. Attribution is session-based, everything is session-based. But when we use these metrics, do we actually know what a session is? Like, how many people will stop in their tracks and start thinking, what is a session? It's a stupid thing to do, but just next time you're looking at numbers, so let's start walking through the list. Well, a Google Analytics session is a group of interactions that takes place on a website, right? I think we can all agree that this is true. It's a group of interactions grouped together somehow, and it takes place on a website. Now, I'm not talking about mobile apps here. That's a can of worms I don't want to open right now. We can talk about it later. But let's talk about the web for a moment. So a group of interactions that expires after 30 minutes of inactivity. That's the default timeout for a session in Google Analytics. So what that means is that the last hit you send to Google Analytics, event, transaction, page view, the visitor has 30 minutes time to send another hit for that session to continue. If they send another hit after 31 minutes, it's a new session. So that's how Google Analytics chops sessions down, 30-minute timeout periods. So, the obvious example is, what if you're watching a video that's 30 minutes and 1 second in length? You click play, sends an event to GA, but you're not tracking anything else during the video. So the video goes on and you watch it all the way to the end, and then you browse another page on the site. Well, 30 minutes passed since the last hit, so it's a new session in GA. When in fact your mindset might still be the very same that was during the last session, but it's a new session in GA. Interesting. Or, this is my favorite one, end of the day, the midnight cutoff point, the most arbitrary limit in any analytics system ever. No, in any IT system ever. If you're browsing the website at 5 seconds to midnight on any given day, you have 5 seconds to do your stuff, or else Google Analytics throws you out of the session and starts a new one. So if you see these weird, landing page not set sessions in your GA, it might be because people are browsing your site on both sides of the midnight bell. And to make it even more ridiculous, It's based on the time zone of the GA profile you're looking at. So if you have a global site with two different GA views, both collecting the data, but both having different time zones. Let's say the first one is in New York time, which is 5 hours behind UTC, and the second one is Spain, which is 1 hour ahead of UTC. So there's a 6-hour time difference, I think. Yeah? Okay, doesn't really matter. At least for part of the year, yeah, damn daylight savings time. So that means that it's possible that these two will report the same session as two different sessions, depending on if midnight just happened to fit into that time difference. So it's a midnight cutoff point. It's completely arbitrary, and yet it exists. And if you have a site with global visitors from all the different time zones, this might very well be a problem for you. It might very well be a problem for you. Then there's these things like acquisition campaign changes. You know, when you visit the site from Google search, immediately leave and then visit via AdWords, the session ends with Google search session ends and a new session starts with an AdWords campaign. Well, of course it does, because they want to attribute everything to AdWords. But it's not just AdWords, it's every single referral change. Unless you put the referral in the referral exclusion list, right? We all do that for payment gateways. Or there's cross-domain traffic, you know. First-party cookies can only be set on the domain of where the visitor is currently browsing. So when you move from one domain to another, you somehow need to inform Google Analytics that, hey, this is the same guy or the same woman who was browsing the site. And to do that, you have to implement cross-domain tracking. Well, unfortunately, it's really difficult to implement correctly, especially if you're using that horrible thing called an iframe. It's really, really difficult. And you see it immediately in your data if it's not working. You see your campaigns not getting attribution for e-commerce. You're seeing your payment referral gateways getting all the attribution. You're seeing weird new session percentages. You're seeing all your transactions being attributed to some weird direct sources. So it's a big problem. Well, we have tools like Google Tag Manager. It is possible to fail with GTM as well. I'm not too naive to say otherwise. GTM isn't perfect. Actually, there's a very steep learning curve to it, which I'm sure everybody has noticed who's used the tool for a longer while. Then there's something called the session control parameter you can use to abruptly end a session. Why not? It's there. There's single-page apps. They go haywire when you're using GTM. And they're pretty difficult with regular GA as well. Then there's all this stuff going on server side, which we don't know. We've seen examples where even though you flush your cookies, your client ID is somehow attributed to the previous one, even though you flushed your cookies. So GA does do some weird things on a granular level, which we don't know about. You know, then there's local storage stuff, there's what I'm trying to, there's a point to all of this, don't worry. This is a mess. This is an algorithm that's now turned into a little anecdote with bad jokes. But the point is that this is a mess. So every time we're in the boardroom reporting on metrics, we're talking about, hey, sir, our conversion rate went up by 5%, or, you know, our bounce rate went down by 5%, and people are popping champagnes and celebrating. There's just the slightest chance that it's because this guy had no idea what a session is and what had happened in the background. Just to give you an example, we know this view. This is the basic GA view for metrics. Every single metric with the red line pointing to it is sessionized. It's impacted by Google Analytics' complex definition of a session. So whenever we talk about e-commerce conversion rate, whenever we talk about average session duration, there's an underlying definition of session that leaves unexplored. We just say, you know, our bounce rate went down, woohoo, our conversion rate went up. If you change any one in the algorithm I showed you, if you change the session timeout from 30 minutes to 29 minutes, every single one of these metrics will change. They will change in consequence because the session timeout changed. If you add a new referral exclusion, these metrics will change. If you add cross-domain tracking to a new domain, these metrics will change without anything happening in the business itself. So when your e-commerce conversion rate goes up from 3.32 to 4.32, it might be a cause for celebration, yes. You might have found a new audience. You might have a really successful campaign. But it might just as well be because some dolt developer tried to implement something and failed. And as a result, all these are now broken on some level. And it's very difficult to find out how they're broken because we're just so bloody happy that the conversion rate went up. We don't care if it's broken, it's still fun to report on it. So, there's this whole industry called conversion rate optimization, and they're trying to make uplifts. These metrics are so easy to manipulate that I'm wondering, whenever somebody asks, can you improve our conversion rate? Yes, I can. I can create a goal which matches every single page on the site, which is 100% conversion rate every single time. Now imagine my fee if I can tell the business, hey, I'll make your conversion rate 100 overnight. It doesn't matter that it doesn't affect the business because they're just looking at the metrics, they're tunnel visioned. And the problem with GA is that it's so prominently used and it's confused. These numbers are too often confused with actual business impact metrics that these conflicts happen. And it's our job as analysts to be responsible for making sure to identify how these metrics relate to the organization we're reporting on. And that's what this talk will be about. This was just the introduction. I ramble on very easily. Luckily, I have a cab to catch, so maybe I'll just stay here for a couple of days. That's fine as well. So, Google Tag Manager. Is there somebody in the room who's unfamiliar with the tool, like hasn't heard about it or hasn't used it? Please let there be somebody. Okay, well then you'll know this stuff. In my opinion, it's the de facto way of deploying GA. I haven't done a hard-coded GA implementation in so long for the web. I've been forced to work with it every now and then, but I haven't done a new implementation with the Analytics.js snippet. Mobile is a different thing, of course. So, it gives us all this nice stuff. Now, the unique selling point of GTM, you don't have to bother IT anymore. Well, I'm not going to even dignify that with a comment. But what GTM actually does, it gives you a centralized place to manage all your measurement and marketing pixels or JavaScript code. It's really, really useful in that way because centralization of this information is really, really good for governance. So it gives us a way to create and deploy all these tracking and measurement scripts. This is so important. Like, this GTM gives us a new tool to communicate with the developers. It's not a tool that excludes the development team. It's a tool which helps us communicate with them more fluently. We're talking about the same things here. We're talking about JavaScript. We're talking about race conditions, HTTP requests, asynchronous scripts. We're talking about using these weird terms that the developers know about, so we can actually talk to them now. It's a linguistic bridge, if you will. And it gives us a chance to focus our time on what's actually important, which is the analysis of the data, because it trivializes so much of the nitty-gritty handiwork that we usually have to do when implementing analytics. So we can actually just start focusing on the important stuff. And if you, you guys know this stuff already, but there's a pretty good course for. I'm going to make sure you get these slides, so no need to take any links or anything. I'll make sure you get them. So now the logical next step, having introduced the problem of sessions and how we should redefine them and how we should realign our metrics with our business metrics, now we can talk about things like content marketing. And now if you don't care about content marketing and you go, oh, come on, talk about e-commerce or attribution or something cool. Well, content marketing is a really good proxy for any kind of analytics because everything is content on the website, everything, not just the text and images and videos, but your products are content, your calls to action are content, your chat forms are content, everything is content. So content marketing, this is just me justifying that you should listen to this. It's very important to look at all the different ways you can use your analytics tool. And I haven't found anything else as good as content marketing or content measurement or engagement measurement that goes through all the levels of an analytics tool. So that's why I want to talk about that. And why do we want to do this? Again, well, I was really happy to see that Clipfolio is a sponsor here because I use their dashboards religiously. This is not a paid advert. I really do. I'm a big fan. So this is the kind of dashboard that I've been using. I've made it a bit prettier recently, but this is an old screenshot. For example, this is my content dashboard. Here we have scroll rate and read rate. We're not talking about conversion rates. I don't believe that engagement has a conversion. We have people who are engaging with content on and off. They don't necessarily become a fan or a subscriber, but they might find something beneficial, but I don't yet know what that is. So I'm using scrolling and reading as a proxy. Now, yes, you might think, read rate. How do you know if people are reading the article? I don't. I've chosen a way of measuring that, and I'm using that as a metric. I will return to that at some point. SERP bounce time, ooh, fascinating. So, Google search doesn't use bounce rate. They don't use the Google Analytics definition of bounce rate in their rankings. It doesn't make sense. Why would they use that? Because I can make bounce rate 0, like in 1 minute. Just send 2 page views on every single hit. So they don't use bounce rate. But what I think the SEO industry is fairly confident about, Dave will note, yes, is that they are interested in the amount of time you are spent away from search. So if you click a link in search and then immediately return to the Google search results page, Google can infer with a bit more data that that necessarily wasn't the correct page for you. So that's what I'm talking about, SERP bounce time. It's the amount of time people who land from Google search to your site spend on your site before pressing the back button. And we're very interested in that. So that's one of the widgets here. Then we have a content funnel. We have how many people opened an article, how many started scrolling, how many read the article. This is more useful to me than a simple scroll depth measurement, for example. You know, where you measure, did they scroll to 1/3, 2/3, or the end? I'm more interested in knowing, did they even open an article? I have a blog. What are they doing on the site if they're not reading articles? There's nothing there. So maybe it's just, maybe I have to do something about it. And then there's something called article performance here. I'm sorry, the font size is very small, but there's nothing significant here for you anyway. So, and I'll go over these soon. But here we're measuring things like engagement time versus time on page. And this is what I want. This is what I want in an analytics project or a process. I want to know what the goals of the organization are, and I want to work with the organization to figure them out. And it's not something you do on day one and then you're satisfied. It's not a waterfall model. It's an agile process. So I'm happy to question the validity of every one of these goals all the time. I do a lot of tweaking with read rate. I might not be satisfied with my definition, so I reevaluate it on a weekly basis. So anyway, there's a couple of things and these are kind of my favorite things to measure. For example, the first one is structured data, and structured data is really cool. How many people use like JSON LD for tracking structured data? Where you put events and tickets and dates and stuff like that, and authors. And then there's other ways. There's microdata, schema.org, all this kind of stuff. But we've been taught by the good people at Google that it's important to add them to your site. So anyway, you can actually you can measure their performance on your website. So here, for example, we have author as a content group, and this is taken from the JSON LD block. There's me and my evil twin Derek, and we're kind of measuring how our articles are faring against some content KPIs. And this is fairly easy to set up. So there's going to be some code now, so everybody can cheer. So this, for example, this is a variable set up in GTM, and what it does is it returns a parsed object of your structured data. And why do we want to do that? Glad you asked. We can do things like this. This returns the name of the author taken from the structured data block. This returns the date the article was published. This returns the article headline. The point is you're grabbing this information from a semantic structure. You're not scraping it from the page, which is typically a no-no when you're doing GTM stuff. The information is already there. It could also be in the data layer. That's fine. I mean, data layer is a very nice structure. But if it's also in the JSON LD, you can just use that. Then you create content groups. Who does not know what a content group is? Yeah, well, I'll return to it shortly, but it's like custom dimensions, basically, but it gives you a handful of reports, standard reports where they're already used. So then in GTM, you would add these variables to your content groups, and you end up with a report like this. Here, for example, this is on a recipe site, a very big Finnish recipe site, and we're measuring like what are the respective content metrics for the grades that people give to these recipes. There's 5 stars max, and you could give a 0.5 star. So 3.5 star recipes are most viewed. whereas 5-star recipes are not the most viewed. You know, this is a silly correlation to find, but it's still interesting. It's a starting point for a research. The important thing is, when I talked with the organization and we talked about what is important for them to measure, and I talked, are you interested in how many people are looking at your recipes, like page views? They said yes. Then I said, wouldn't it be also interesting to know what the ratio of the recipes are, like how people are grading them? Is there a correlation between recipe grade and how it performs? Like, are people commenting on it? Stuff like that. There's a 420% bounce rate on the 4-star recipes. I might want to look into that. That's shocking. No champagnes for that. Then there's things like article attributes. So now, first we talked about semantic information that's already there on the page. Every now and then we actually do have to scrape the page, but this is really interesting stuff for content marketers. For example, this little script here returns the number of images on the page. Is there a correlation between the number of images on the page and how people are engaging with it? Maybe. We don't know. We have to measure it. Let's use this. So this returns buckets. If there's, 9 images, it returns 8 to 10, because just having the actual number of images might be too granular. This returns the number of words on the page. Is there a correlation between article length and how people are engaging with it, or how people scroll up and down it? This returns the length of the headline. Is there a correlation between title length and how people are interacting with it? These are all silly questions. They're silly questions to ask. Who cares about title length if it's a snappy title? But we can measure it so we don't have to speculate about it at the water cooler. We can actually see if there's an impact. And we add these as content groups as well. And we end up with a result like this, for example. 3,000-word articles are the most viewed articles on this site. You can even click that content group label to drive into the actual page paths. This is really, really interesting stuff, because now we're dissecting our content. We're dissecting our content based on content attributes. Not just the semantic information, not just the author and stuff like that, but the actual content attributes. And we're trying to find correlations between article length, title length, and stuff like that. And we can pair these with Google search landings, for example, to see if there's some impact on the algorithm from these things. Again, the weird 270% bounce rate. Very fishy. Now, the thing is, Google Analytics, the most used analytics tool in the world, created by the most benevolent and hugest and largest and galactical, beautiful corporation called Google, or Alphabet. They gave us 5 content groupings in all their infinite wisdom and generosity. Let's talk about this number. 5, ridiculous. Honestly. Let's count them out. Author, date published, category, main tag, title length, images, words, links, calls to action. We have 5 content groups. That's nothing. That is absolutely nothing. And that's a real, real shame. I don't like that. It's not fair, because they're a really nice feature. And I don't think GA Premium even supports anymore. I think 5 is just what we get. Well, we have custom dimensions, of course, and we can replace those. They do exactly the same thing. The problem is that they don't integrate it into the standard reports, which might be fine for some of you. For example, I spend very little time in the GA UI. I actually use Google Sheets, which has a nice add-in. I use Clipfolio, I use Tableau, whatever tools are at my disposal. The UI is quite bloated. But it does have the content groupings, and we don't know what their future is. There might be some really interesting integrations on the way, but we only have 5 of them. Well, 20 dimensions isn't much either. I mean, with a basic analytics audit for almost any kind of site, you can hit 15 custom dimensions, like on a stride, just on the top of your head. But still, it's more than 5. Google is such a weird company. I mean, they do this stuff all the time. Okay, then we're talking about the SERP bounce time, and this is a really interesting exercise. What it gives us is this. Here are landings from Google search, these pages on the left. The number of entrances measured from Google search for those visits that immediately, or that left back to Google search from the landing, And there's the bounce time. So we can actually see that the average bounce time back to the SERP is 5 minutes. So we can let's do some brash correlations or conclusions. Somebody finds an article, clicks the link, looks at the article, spends 5 minutes there and goes back to the SERP because they were happy and they maybe want to look at something else now. But then we can look at what are the top bounce pages, and there are articles with only a 2-minute bounce time or even 1 minute and something, which are way below the average SERP bounce time. And this is interesting because then if we align this with landings from organic search, we can start looking for alarming signals before they turn into actual traffic loss. So we can start looking at, is the SERP bounce time increasing for sites or pages that are at the top of our organic search landing page list? And we can start doing preparations for making sure that they don't lose their ranking. Because typically it's an indication of poor keyword alignment with content. People are looking for one thing, found your article, and realized it wasn't a good thing for them, so they went back to the site. But this lets us actually concretely measure that impact. It's hackety-hack. We're going deep into the bowels of the web browser here, as you can see from line 32 of this JavaScript, where there's a little typo. If somebody notices it right now, they'll get a beer from me. Sorry, there wasn't a typo. It was just a test that you're all following me. We build that JavaScript. That's one JavaScript that's driving the whole thing. It works with the browser history API, so it actually creates a fake page or a fake history entry. So when you press the back button in the browser, it realizes, hey, you want to go back to Google search, and it sends the timing of how long you spent on the page before redirecting you back. And there's some variables, and there's some events. Oh, there's more JavaScript here. We use a custom metric for this, which we turn into a Google tag. There's some exclamation points so you know what to look at. Very useful presentation technique, by the way. There's a calculated metric. So we're measuring the actual time that's spent on the page. And then we create a custom report. I'm just going to browse through this because you get the slides later on. But what we get, and we're back to this report. And what we get is a measurement based on a hypothesis. And this is important to me. If I want content on this particular site, it's a very good blog, by the way, to fare well in Google search, I'm interested in knowing, not just because it might be a ranking signal, that's secondary importance to myself, but if people are actually spending way less time on the page than average, and returning back to SERP, that is a signal for me to do something about it. Maybe look at what kind of activities they do on the page otherwise. Do they only look at the ingress and then go back? Do they scroll down? Do they only go to the comments field? Maybe it's just people opening the stuff in the browser tabs and never looking at it. I want to know this stuff. I want to quantify that problem with this metric, and this is what I'm doing here. So it's an interesting exercise. I don't have any concrete data yet. I don't know if it's a very powerful ranking signal, but I am seeing interesting correlations all over the place. Then content engagement. And man, this is a difficult thing. This is so difficult. Like content engagement. People are talking about engagement all the time, everywhere, but no one's actually talking about what it is. What is engagement with content? So I've decided to talk about it like this. I call it the average interactive time. Now, Google Analytics, again, in its infinite wisdom, has a metric called average time on page in the page view reports. It tells you the time delta between 2 page view hits. So when the user lands on page A and then sends a hit from page B, the time between those 2 hits is the time on page for page A for that session or for that interaction. Now the problem is, if the user lands on page A and immediately opens page B in a browser tab, but stays on page A, the time on page for page A was that time before the page B page view was sent, if you're still following me. It's broken. It's also broken because it doesn't take into account exit pages, the last page the user viewed on the site. It doesn't have a second page view. It doesn't take into account bounce rate. So what I'm measuring here with interactive time is I'm measuring time on page is measured only for people who are actually interacting with the page, moving the mouse, scrolling the page, pressing on keyboard, thumbing up and down the page. Only when you're doing that is your engagement be measured. And if you take a pause, if you lift your hands from the keyboard and the mouse, the timer pauses. So you might still be reading. I accept that it's a flaw, but still only engagement. And here's the metrics. It's by average 7 times less is the average interactive time compared to the time on page that GA reports. There's a bit more JavaScript here for you. It's always good to have some before lunch. You know, some of these cool things, some exclamation marks again, you know, wake up. And we get this report. And I really like this experiment. I'm not sure, again, what it means. I'm still working on that. I'm a really, really bad analyst, but I'm trying to make sense of this data. But what it does tell me is that there is a difference in what we perceive as engagement and what GA claims engagement is. You might want to take a look at tools like Chartbeat, which does the same thing. Or there's a JavaScript plugin called Rivet, or Riveted, maybe Rivet, that does the same thing. So there are all these things that you can do to measure this interactive time. But it's a very useful exercise if you're a content marketer. And then there's this kind of holy grail that I've been really proud about. This was so cool to do. But being a content person myself, I don't have any products or e-commerce funnels, but GA has these kick-ass enhanced e-commerce reports. I love them, and they're really, really cool. They're session-based, which sucks, but the reports themselves are really nice. So what I did was I turned my articles into products, and what I got was this kind of a report. We have product revenue, which is the number of words that were read on the site. It's a vanity metric if there ever was one. You know, you have things like cart to detail rate, which is actually the amount of people who started scrolling out of all people who open an article. So I can see that, you know, 83% of people who open articles start scrolling it. That's an interesting metric. There's a byte to detail, which is like the read rate. So 26% by average of people who open an article reached all the way to the end and spent, you know, a minute on the site. That's my definition of read rate. This is a really, really interesting exercise for a content person like myself because I'm using GA's default reports, but I'm bending them. I'm giving Google the finger. I'm not using them for e-commerce. I'm using them for content. And this is the beauty of what you can do with GA and GTM. You can take these hard and fast metrics and dimensions that GA shoves down your throat, and you kind of take them out of your throat, to put it nicely, and you turn them around so that they are actually useful for your organization. You don't have to use GA's definition of bounce rate, but you can turn it useful for your company or your organization. So how many people are using accelerated mobile pages? Anybody yet? Okay, some. Well, it's an interesting phenomenon. GTM just came out with an AMP container. It's good. It's really good for measuring AMP pages. And there's an article coming soon. I just wanted to, you know, okay, yeah. So I just wanted to, you know, watch this space. Today or tomorrow, I don't know. So 5 takeaways from this long rant. Data quality. The thing we work with, the thing that Google Analytics promises us out of the box is something you have to earn. And you earn things by working towards them. You don't acquire it out of the box. It's not like you put your plug in the wall and you get data quality. No, you have to do work for it. That's why there's a multi-billion-dollar industry in analytics. It's not just people plugging GA in. It's people doing actual work to make sure all their data peripherals, and all their verticals are contributing towards this common goal of data quality. Google Analytics, way too generic if you just plug it in and start looking at the reports. You have to customize it. And the way you customize it is don't just Google for adjusted bounce rate and then install it. Like, you know, a timer which goes off after 10 seconds or something. That's fishy. Don't do that. Or, you know, if you want to do it, I'm not here to tell you what to do or what not to do. But make sure that it tells you something about your organization. Whenever you're doing a customization, ask yourself, what is this doing for my organization? What am I trying to unravel here? And content measurement is a really good proxy. If you have any kind of content on your site, you should be measuring it somehow. Maybe use one of these tricks. Maybe there are lots of other great articles about content measurement. This last one is something I could just do a talk about it on its own. We are living in a world where we have to know about JavaScript. I'm sorry, my friends. It's the single most important skill of any web analyst interested in data collection and data quality. We have to know what happens in the critical render path when a browser renders a page. We have to know what the mechanism is. We have to know what a race condition is. We have to know why doesn't these clicks measure when I try to click something. We have to know this stuff. It's not difficult. It just requires time and effort like everything good in life. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to leave quite soon, But come and talk to me if you have any questions, or tweet or send me email or something, and I'll be happy to talk about this stuff later on. So thanks again for your patience.